My name is Herb, and I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to our gathering, again, the final gathering of this session, where we've been looking at the 12 concepts in a gentle and light touch way, because I certainly don't have much personal experience with them, but I've had lots of exposure to them over the years. And I thought it would be wonderful for us to go through it together to get a sense of what they are, certainly, and their value, as well as, and this is my primary focus for myself, the personal application, not necessarily in the service structure, but the personal applications, like we do the steps and then we do the traditions. The traditions weren't meant initially for our personal application, but they do have a wonderful meaning when we take a look at our own relationships through the eyes of the principles of the traditions. And so this is an attempt to experience that same thing, although anybody on the call today who has actual knowledge and or experience in the service structure of their respective 12-step fellowships. Most of the 12-step fellowships have adopted the steps and the traditions and the concepts from AA with very little change in the wording, except where necessary. So each of the 12-step fellowships has, I do believe this, adopted the 12 concepts for their own structure and their purpose. Please join me in a prayer to have an open mind and open heart today, right now, here in this next couple hours that we'll be together with regard to our community knowledge and experience with these concepts. May we be inspired. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, the 12 concepts, my practical application, and you, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, the 12 concepts, my practical application, and especially you. Please join me in prayer for serenity. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. I'll give a little bit of a orientation and context, and then I'll introduce at least my suggestion as to how to proceed for today. Just a review for some people who may not have been here or who have, in fact, heard this before, seen this before, thought about this before, but serves as a refresher. Bill Wilson was brilliant in so many different ways, a seeker of the truth, a seeker with regard to the resource for his recovery, certainly from addiction, although he knew very little bit about it until he met Dr. Silkworth, then learned a lot about it. And as you know, he got sober in 1934, December, and 5 years later, approximately April of 1939, he published a book based on his and the community's experience. One of the things that we really do need to remember, I think it's really important, that he did not write that book by himself. Well, he wrote the majority of it. He drafted it. There's no question. He was the major author. There's no question from my standpoint. But he took the draft every time he got a revision manuscript, and he distributed it to the, I'll use a term, it's a clunky term, but it's leadership. There's no leadership in AA, but these were the people who had about 6 months sobriety. There weren't many. That was long-term sobriety in those days. And he had them review the manuscript and make their suggestions. And he also sent it out to some institutions, the medical society, the psychiatric society, some of the churches, etc., for review and feedback. So that book was written with group conscience. I do believe that's why it's never been changed, and it hangs together from an organic standpoint in terms of the understanding of human nature as well as the step process for transformation. Later on, he saw that the groups themselves that were forming in their local communities, because of human nature and the nature of groups, needed some principles in order to survive human nature and the group nature of egocenteredness. And he created the 12 principles he calls the traditions for group unity. But his brilliance is really manifest. And if you have ever had an opportunity to review the manual, the service manual, you'll see it there. I come from a background in consulting in human resources for 40 years. That was my career. I loved it. And I'm so impressed with his understanding of business and of human nature in the way he structured the 12 principles we call the concepts of service. It's a fancy term until you get underneath it. Well, what's its purpose and what does it mean? Its purpose is to run a business, a spiritual, nonprofit organization. Paid staff. Today, I think there's 100 or 120 paid staff members in New York or connected to the General Service Office. But this is the organization that supports carrying the message. When I was reviewing this yesterday, it became really, really very prominent to me that that's the single purpose, is to sustain, I wrote it down, to sustain the integrity and availability of the message, to sustain the integrity. How does it hold together in terms of the message itself as decades go by and cultures change and the atmosphere changes? How do you maintain the integrity of the message? But also the availability. That's a question that chronically is on my mind, is how to make the message more available. I suffered for 43 years because I didn't know I was an addict, alcoholic. Then I discovered that, and I suffered again for 4 more years because I didn't know underneath that addiction wasn't the problem, that unmanageability was the problem, the spiritual malady was the problem. And I didn't know that I didn't know, despite going to a meeting every day, talking to a sponsor every day, being in step studies and book studies. No, I'm a serious seeker. Those of you who know me know that. And it eluded me because the message wasn't visible in the meetings I was going to, with the people I was talking to, the things I was reading, the discussions we were having. The steps were not very visible. The big book as a textbook was completely invisible to me. Yeah, no, that's a huge criticism of AA and the people in AA at that time. I think it's a criticism that stands today, not in the negative sense, but in the observation that there's been a complete misperception of what the program of recovery is. It's not meetings, but I'm not going to get on that tangent. Meetings are important, but they're not the program. The program of recovery is captured in the 12 steps. The program of recovery is going to be sustained because of the group cohesion in unity in the traditions and those principles. And the principles that are the guidelines and guardrails, those are my favorite terms, as you know, who if you had any exposure to me at all about principles. It's a fancy word. It doesn't have any traction unless you think about it. Principles. What is that? It's a value proposition. It's a truth. It's about nature. The principle of gravity, for instance, is a physical law of nature. Well, the principles we're talking about here are the emotional and spiritual and human and universal, whatever word you want to use, principles for human beings. Core values. In fact, Bill uses the term principle as a synonym for the steps. Practice these principles in all our affairs. He never gives us a list of principles. It's up to us to sort them out, to speculate about them. The message, that's the 12th step, isn't it? Having had a spiritual awakening, digest that for a minute. That's the promise. The ultimate purpose and promise of the 12-step process, having had a spiritual awakening. As the result of these steps, by the end of the 9th step, the spiritual awakening guarantees on page 84 that we will be placed in a position of neutrality. Very overlooked. The meetings will not get us sober. Prayer and meditation won't get us sober. Helping others won't get us sober. Reading the big book won't get us sober. I'm writing an article right now. It's about 3 pages. I keep changing it every day I touch it on this very sort of basic concept. There's only one component to get us sober and keep us sober, and that's a relationship with power. That's it. Oh, but how do we get there? Well, now we're talking about all the other things I just dismissed. I've seen the term and I've adopted it. The preconditions, the preconditions. Not that it's a formula. It feels like, it looks like a formula, but it's not really a formula, because I say preconditions for the mystery. I don't know how that accumulates to produce the alchemic result of sobriety, but it does, and it's promised in the big book there on page 84. When we come out of the 9th step, Bill says we enter the world of the spirit. But we're not cured. This is so important. You've heard me preach about it. I'll use that term. Not cured, a daily reprieve, the best kept secret in the rooms. Because most people don't understand unmanageability. Most people do not understand the spiritual malady, although they, and I'm as guilty as anybody for so long, 10 years in recovery, having gone through the steps twice. The 2 men who took me through the steps those first 2 times, they didn't know about the spiritual malady and unmanageability as described in the big book, not structurally as Bill laid out the big book. Even Bill, although he understood it, didn't lay it out so that we would get it in sequence. He ends his discussion on the first step on page 43, which is the conclusion of the first half of the first step, addiction. And then he weaves in the information about unmanageability in the next couple chapters, 4 and 5. As any of you who have participated in my workshop and we've unpacked unmanageability know. Page 52 with the bedevilments, and pages 60 to 62 with the description of the source of the bedevilments. The bedevilments being the behavior of self-centeredness. We look at behavior first, and then we get underneath the behavior to see the exact origin and nature of the source of why that behavior is so. He concludes on page 62 with regard to self-centeredness as the source of unmanageability, in the same way he concludes on page 43, addiction as the source of our problem with alcohol. Page 43, there'll come a time and a place, I'm paraphrasing, that will have no mental defense against the first drink. Then he goes into step 2. But if you've gone through my workshop, you know that we go directly into unmanageability, page 52, as the behavior, page 60 to 62 as the exact source, where Bill ends on page 62, that second paragraph, talking about our inability to deal effectively with our self-centeredness. We can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on our own power. The message is steps 2 and 3, help is available. Step 2, and we have to ask for help in step 3. And we have to do some work to demonstrate our willingness, 4 through 9. And then if we want to sustain the awakening that we will experience, if we want to sustain it, we need to grow in understanding and effectiveness. This is not a maintenance program. And this is not a self-help program. He says we have to grow in understanding and effectiveness. And in step 12, he talks about carrying this message. That's what I just described. That's the message. I don't have sufficient power. Sufficient power is available. I can have a relationship with sufficient power if I take some actions, guaranteed. I will have this experience, but I will not be able to sustain it, not cured. I will not be able to maintain it, daily reprieve, on my own power. The understanding and the experience that I have is just wonderful. But I need to stay connected to the light. And I'm currently using that metaphor a lot, darkness and light, because it's so graphic. To clear the obstacles in me, those shadows in me, with step 10. On a spot check basis when I'm disturbed. To fill my channel with light, step 11, in the morning, and to remove the obstacles at night that I missed during the day with my 10th step. And then to practice these principles in all my affairs. But to carry this message, if you want to deal effectively with your addiction, do steps 4 through 9, and then sustain that experience through a daily practice of 10, 11, and 12. That's the message, as I'm interpreting it. And these principles are, as I mentioned, to manage a nonprofit spiritual business. Nonprofit, nobody makes any money here. Spiritual, a relationship. My synonym for spiritual is relationship. A relationship with life. That's a word that covers the entire spectrum of power, higher power, light, nature, as we don't understand it. But most especially, and more relevantly to each one of us, the thing that should or could motivate each one of us is it's an effective relationship with myself and my true self. I won't unpack that. Most of you have heard me do that. The true self, the core of goodness, as one of my teachers calls it. The first 3 steps put us in relationship with life, with a capital L. the next 4 steps with ourselves. And the next 2, maybe you could include step 10 in that, a relationship with others. I use the term guidance and guardrails for principles, both a sort of a positive and negative connotation there. Guidance and guardrails, constantly bumping up against the extremes on both sides. But those principles are guidance. That's the when I'm bumping up against it, the yellow light is on and I'm disturbed, and if I'm awake, I will use the 10th step to course correct. Guidance, because I become conscious and I become more conscious and I become more conscious, like the dimmer switch. The more light I have, the more conscious I am, the more alignment I have with reality. And the more quickly I see when I'm out of alignment, because I'm aware of my feelings of disturbance, and the more effectively I put myself back in alignment using the 10th step formula. More quickly, more effectively, and I make less gross mistakes less often and correct them more effectively, more quickly. We will always be, we're a mistake machine. We'll always make mistakes. Bill says it in step 10. When they crop up, not if. So these principles and the concepts are principles for the structure, which is an upside down structure. It's counterintuitive and countercultural. It's the purest form of democracy. The individuals in the 12-step fellowship, those are the people that determine the direction. Now, obviously, because of human nature, we need to have a representative of the group at the smallest level, at the local level, a representative, and then we have a group of representatives, and then we have a representative of the group of representatives, and eventually we get to an annual meeting. And it's that annual conference that continues the direction, integrity of, and availability of the message every year. Hundreds of people gather and in committees and all kinds of wonderful structure, as we've been talking about, to make decisions about the next year and to continue to make the message available, visible, and effective. It's the constant concern of and purpose of and mission of the World Service Conference. Originally, of course, and you know the history, Bill and Bob were the leaders. If there was an issue, the people went to Bill and Bob, but then Bob died, 1950, and it really got Bill's attention. He knew that he needed to step out of the way and create a structure of authority and leadership. A delegation and an effective way of communicating. A delegation of authority, a delegation of responsibility, and making sure the authority and the responsibility were correlated. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant understanding of human nature and of the spiritual principles that would guide it in a very clean way. Well, that was longer than I thought. But and so I really am going to start, and we're going to talk about the message, and then I'm going to end some slides and some comments about the message, because it struck me yesterday as I was thinking about this and meditating on it. That's really the total point. I've never been involved in the service structure. I have reviewed it recently because of this workshop as to whether that's part of my invitation, and I don't believe it is to be involved in the service structure. I have other competencies that seem to carry the message in a different way than being involved in the actual business of carrying the message. At the same time, I believe I'll be having some conversations with the people at the highest of levels in the group conference office that are in fact involved in the service structure, so that if I can be of service or help, I can do it at that level. But I use the term alignment a lot. It's not in the big book, but it's my interpretation of step 3. Made a decision to turn from what to what? From my self-centeredness to other-centeredness. No, it's that simple. You've heard me say it. It bears repeating. I think about it a lot. That's the turning, to be in alignment with reality. That's a wonderful cover net for everything. Reality with a small r. No, it's not fancy, it's not sophisticated. It's just what is life as it manifests. To be in alignment. That's the harmony of emotional sobriety. That's the word that Bill gave us back in 1956 when he wrote the letter. He called it the next frontier. Well, it didn't get any traction. In the last 10 years, it's begun to get some traction. The focus on steps 10, 11, and 12 as how to stay in alignment with reality. We call it a fancy term, perhaps, emotional sobriety. It just means harmony, balance, homeostasis. If I'm thirsty and I take a drink of water, I'm not thirsty any longer. That's all I mean by homeostasis. The satisfaction of our instincts at the basic level, the satisfaction of our inclinations at the human and spiritual level and emotional level. Keeping the channel clear, as I mentioned. I use alliteration because I think it makes it more memorable. Step 10 being conscience. Step 11 being consciousness. Step 12 being compassion. Yes, all C's. It's a little artificial, but it really helps me understand the dynamic of this way of life. That's what Bill calls it, a way of life. That's the message. Yes, the initial message is that you can recover from your addiction. Guaranteed. I don't mince my words with people anymore at all. No, it's guaranteed. Relapse is not a necessary part of recovery. Oh, it's a frequent part for lots of people. It's not my experience, but and my heart goes out to the people that really struggle. But I know that if, in fact, they stay gently pressed up against this process, steps 4 through 9, if they're willing and they keep showing up and they take the actions, not perfect, to the best of their ability, eventually they'll get the traction. I can't explain that. That's that grace that is a gift that everybody has, but not everybody accesses. That's why I called the steps the preconditions, but they're not a formula. And the message then, the message that I'm so appreciative of is about steps 10, 11, and 12. That yes, you can become awake through steps 1 through 9, but you can stay awake and grow in understanding and effectiveness. That's the secret sauce here for living a life, in contrast to restless, irritable, and discontent, happy, joyous, and free. Those are words from the big book. You know them. Restless, irritable, and discontent in the doctor's opinion. Happy, joyous, and free is part of, I think it's A Vision for You, chapter 11 in the big book. All right. You never know where I'm going. So what I'd like to do today is take a look at the concepts, your experience with them as you've gone through, perhaps with us since July, and in some disciplined, perhaps organized way, structural way, look at the first three, and then take the next three, and then the next three, and the next three, to people talk about its relevance to you personally, or your interpretation of its possible principles in your personal life, or in the organization and your exposure and activity in your 12-step fellowship. As I said, I don't have any practical experience with the concepts in the application in the service structure because I've not been involved in the service structure. And I thought about reading each of the concepts, but you have two tools. If you've downloaded what I suggested right from the beginning, you have the worksheets, which is what I'm looking at, and you have the checklist. Well, you also have the concepts illustrated, but we've gone through all of that literature and we've had conversations about it. Kim couldn't join us today. She had a conflict, but she was one of the people that had some wonderful experience, which she shared with us. And she said she's with us in spirit today. So I made some notes on the worksheets, and I'd like to take them one at a time, the concepts, and for the next 20 minutes or 30 minutes, talk about the first three concepts. I have a hard stop at noon my time. That's 2 hours for those of you not in my time zone. And that's an hour and a half from now. So we'll probably do 4 in the segments of half hour. And the first concept talks, from my standpoint, a lot about the purpose of the concepts themselves. And that is the structure, the management of the structure of the business itself, the upside down triangle, and making it very clear about responsibility and authority. Talking about that God is the source, that's the power. Again, the steps are about a relationship with God. The traditions are about the group conscience, that is God manifesting in the group. The concepts are about the flow of the Spirit in the service structure itself, managed by group conscience at the most basic level, granular, that'd be a good word, level, the individuals in each group, and then the groups, as I mentioned in my opening comments. So that there's always this group conscience at the group level and all the way up into the General Service Conference. That unity that Bill talks about in the traditions is manifest in the concepts, in the way the service structure operates with respect and tolerance. Later on, we'll look at even of the minority opinion, that true democracy, substantial unanimity. That's a word Bill coined for this purpose here in the management of the structure. Okay, are there anytime there are you have questions or comments or an addition from practical experience, or perhaps even the speculation of how it might apply to your personal life?
I was I was thinking about concept one and just overall the whole idea that the groups are ultimately responsible and are the final authority. And to me, it's similar to stockholders in a corporation,
Yeah.
and those who are in the service structure, including the paid workers, have a duty to take care of the business for the groups. And however, I I did. I think I mentioned before I was on the service board for our local service board here in Orange County for a number of years, and and we found that we realized that we didn't have any insurance on the service board. No, it hadn't been done from when I looked in the past, and I don't think they'd ever had insurance. And so that was something that because
It's,
the fact that we have the concepts and all that, it doesn't stop the need for following correct business practices. And even though it's not spelled out specifically in anywhere to do that, it's like, okay, we have to follow, it's like we realize that, you know, something could happen, realize the possibility of someone suing one or all of us. And even though ideally, hopefully that would never happen, but I know it has, and
well,
so
that's very practical. We're running a business, and business needs insurance, but most people who come into the 12-step rooms are not necessarily aware of the business implications of running a business. And that's such an important concept, Tennis. Thank you for bringing it up. Go ahead with your comments.
yeah. And it's interesting because at first there was a little bit of like, uh, I think people were kind of surprised that we would need it, or there was different.
Right.
But then when we brought it to the groups, it's like ultimately it's like, hey, this is what we have, and we didn't really bring it to the groups to tell them or to ask them. We told them because it's like it needed to be done, and
That's
plus it's like
leadership. No,
there were
that's
people,
leadership. No,
yeah, I mean there's
first you inform them, and then you implement what you know is the right thing to do. That's right.
right. And it's so important to like provide the information and the reasoning behind it and all this. And then people are like, oh yeah, in fact, people are like, it's like it's really interesting. And then like even a similar experience happened a number of years ago through World Service where they uh, they didn't exactly pull the groups, but they were asking all the different areas to come up with uh, uh, guidelines for Alateen. And
Right.
at the time, there was a lot of pushback and everything, and people were like, "Oh, whatever, we don't need that or whatever." But little did we know there was like some lawsuits going on
Right.
at World Service that they weren't able to let us know all of the details, and so
Right.
they had to pretty much. At the time, I felt like they were ramrodding it. I really had that feeling. And in fact, I was against some of it. And then now in hindsight, knowing after things have come out and knowing more, it's like they did what they had to do.
Yeah.
And
Interesting. Yeah.
and it was for the survival of the fellowship too. It's
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
get some huge lawsuit going on. It's like,
Right.
so yeah, there's a lot to do with business, and I didn't even I didn't realize that when I first got involved in service, and even when I was on the board,
Right.
it's like, oh, this is going to be really easy, and da 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 da, and
It
then
Right.
wasn't.
it wasn't. And then even the what do you call it? The paid staff worker that I was, chairperson for, I think, 2 months, and she let me know that she was retiring, and I was like, oh my God, I have to like we have to hire somebody,
Yeah.
and that
Right.
was a whole thing, it's like,
Right. Right.
and the employment laws, all that stuff that you're not aware of, and there's just a lot about it. So yeah, I there's so much underneath those concepts, but they're the
Well,
guide.
and I'm gonna take the opportunity to also recommend anybody here that might be on a board for a nonprofit organization. That happens a lot in our communities. That's the first question I ask. That's my background is insurance, and that's the first question I ask. Does the board have insurance on its board members?
Yeah.
And most of them don't. Because they haven't thought about it. They're there to help out and that kind of thing, but they need that kind of liability protection. It's not that expensive, but it is really important.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah. I was
yeah,
shocked that we didn't have it. I
yeah,
was really
right,
shocked.
right,
But
right, right. And one of the
there's
things
so
that
many people
really
before.
impressed me, I'm sorry.
Sorry. There was so many people before us that I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe nobody ever
Right,
noticed that,
right,
but I
right.
mean, you just never know.
Well, one of the things I was very impressed with initially becoming exposed to the concepts and the service manual was that Bill, of course, was a very brilliant businessman and was very aware that you need competent professionals as guides to the program. That's where the trustees come in. They're brought in as trustees, not as a recognition of any type of service, but because they need legal advice, they need medical advice, they need psychological advice, they need financial advice, et cetera, et cetera. And so they bring in people that have demonstrated leadership and competence in these various areas to help us run our business. Yeah. Anything else, Tanis or Paul?
Yeah, I quite yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I watched her for a number of years and gauge all that, and it's really many challenges that she was able to work through there. I'm pretty new to the concepts myself, but 1 through 3, it strikes me as that principle of group conscience, and I guess kind of like you, Herb, I've been in business for some time, and and out there it's a totally different context. I mean, they're not like when we're trying to make the numbers for the month, they're not talking about spiritual principles, right? There's another framework, and so we're so fortunate to have this as our sort of our guiding light, hopefully. But like she said, it's I forget where in the it talks about keeping our head in the clouds and our feet on the ground. Maybe it's in Family Afterwards, somewhere in there, right? But yeah, just because we're a spiritual entity, it doesn't mean we're magically excused from the affairs of the earth either. Like insurance, stuff like that. We're a spiritual entity. We shouldn't need insurance, but we're in the real world as well. So there's that, very important dynamic, and that's why the group conscience has to be informed. She talked about that once
Right.
people understood what was at stake, the right people were on the team, and they were able to say, okay, yeah, we need to do this, thanks for letting us know. Well, they didn't
Well,
exactly say it like that, but
yeah.
Yeah. But if they didn't do it, it's like they were going to have a lot of people on the board quit. That's basically,
Right, right.
and we alluded to that too.
Well, and Paul, you mentioned the word informed. Um, I'm not informed about the service structure up until now, and I'm not informed of the conference and the subjects of and the topics of the conference and or the discussion and or of the outcomes. And I mean, I've been around now for 38 years, and it's never occurred to me to be involved in being aware. It's sort of not in my nature. I don't watch news and I don't get involved politically outside in other things. But I can see now that I have a desire to be a little bit more responsible because the service structure needs to survive, and people are making decisions about it.
Mhm.
As a member of it, I want to at least be aware of the headlines. You know what I mean?
yeah,
I
yeah,
do not want to be involved in the committees and that discussion. I know that's not my gift at all. In fact, just the opposite. But yeah, to stay informed so that at least at the my home group level, I have a
Yeah,
meeting I've been going to for 38 plus. It was my first meeting, and there's so much lack of, I'll just use the word lack of information and or misinformation at the group level, that at least I could be a contributor responsible at my home group for at least having a modicum of the headlines as to what's going on.
Yeah, that's so true, because I've heard people make announcements or whatever, is like, wait a minute, no, that's not what it, and to try and not say it out loud to that person, but to maybe talk
not
to
to
them
shame 'em.
afterwards,
Yeah.
not to shame them, let them know, explain it a little bit, have it be like a learning process, and then suggest to them maybe the next week for them to, correct their announcement or whatever.
Well, I think that's an important principle here in human resources is, and I learned it in my business environment, you never criticize in public.
Right. Yep.
You praise in public, but you criticize privately, like you just said. If you really want to be effective and you're not grandstanding your own ego, you follow that principle of respect. You respect the individual so that you can give them praise in public. That's, everybody likes that. But if you want to correct information and or somebody's behavior, you want to do that very privately and very carefully and in prayer. Yeah, that's
Thanks.
a very important point. Thanks,
I'm
Dennis.
sorry, and I don't want to take too much time, but like I too, as a result of this workshop, have been intrigued by like what's going on out there in their service structure. So thanks for that. And also you've helped me in terms of like being a leader, manager. Yeah. How do you not have power over other people's behaviors, but yet need accountability as a manager? That's a very,
That's a hard line to walk. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
People do not like accountability, and yet in business, that's your role as a leader to,
right.
and that's where I think this program of ours really helps us be kind, loving, tolerant, but at the same time objective in the truth.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
you helped me actually discharge someone, and I was
correct.
able to have a clear conscience when
Yeah,
that happened.
yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, we have a roofer here. Sorry for the background noise.
Not a problem. Thank you very much, both of you. Mr. Bob, please.
Hi, you can just discount this question if it's off topic or
Oh, believe me, I will.
Okay, good. Well, you guys said something that mystified me. You said insurance on a board member.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, what would that be? And
Liability, it's called liability insurance, board liability insurance.
in case
somebody gets a hair up there, whatever, about the activities or policies of the board and sues the organization. If you're a board member, you're liable.
Really?
No, yes, really.
I don't know. I tend to just try.
No, and many people who have not been in business certainly don't know. Yeah, it's and so that's why I brought it to people's attention. Yeah, it's a question to ask. I wouldn't serve on a board that didn't have board of directors liability insurance.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, especially here in California. I mean, we have too many lawyers, but oops, scored. Excuse me. Usher, please.
Hi, I'm O'Share.
Hi.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I just wanted to share some of the insights that I've had, both serving on various national boards. I don't live in the U.S. and also trying to learn how to apply these principles in my personal affairs. And so just looking at some of my notes, because I find, that because we don't study the concepts as much in meetings that
Oh,
I
not
need the
at all. Oh my
repetition,
God. The
right,
eyes
over
would
and over
roll
again.
over.
Well, there is an Al-Anon Zoom meeting that studies the concepts that they do,
Wow.
step tradition concept, and
Wow.
I did go through. There was a meeting for a while on Zoom where we went through the concepts twice, so it was
Nice.
really beautiful. So they do exist.
Yeah.
Um, and so for me, what I've been taught is the first concept helps me right size. I'm
Mhm.
not going to be the authority, and
Right.
I really need that reminder sometimes.
Yeah.
And so whenever I'm looking to myself or to another person as the authority, I'm mistaken. And that we have this entire process that essentially manifests our authority for us, and we need to have the patience to go through that process.
I'm
Um,
hoping people are hearing what you're saying, because that's very important statement, and I'm going to ask you to repeat it now that I'm bringing it to people. No, because people need to really hear this. It's embedded, I believe, in the third concept, and that is the to hear, listen to, and trust the leadership. Go ahead, please.
right, and so we have an entire process that has been adapted for in each fellowship, that we need to trust that process and allow it to happen. And so I'm not an authority, not another human being is not an authority, but rather the process manifests the authority for us. And so in concept 2, it brings us this idea of delegating. And as a member of Al-Anon, delegation is not my thing. I wasn't brought up with delegation in my alcoholic family. And so it's certainly something, it's a new structure that I need to learn. And I find that the rest of the concepts, essentially for me after concept 2, explain to me how to delegate. They
That's
teach me
right.
how.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and I really need that teaching, because without it, I don't know what that means. I'm going to
Right.
delegate to you, but then I'm going to tell you exactly how to do it. I like to micromanage. And
Well,
then when you don't do it,
it's, yeah, delegation is a tricky thing. It's not saying do this and then abandoning it, expecting it to be done. No. And yet it's not in controlling them and telling them how to do it. Yeah, it's that balance, isn't it?
it's quite the balance. And particularly on the national boards, learning how to let a committee make a decision and defining the scope of their authority and responsibility from the beginning, which is something that we're taught in the concepts later on, is so important, because if not, then we kind of come to concept 3. They don't have a right of decision.
Right.
When a group sends a member off to an intergroup, and then the intergroup sends to area or district, et cetera, et cetera. It depends on, in each country, it's different. What is that person? Does that person need to go back to the group and ask the group what they want? Right of decision tells us no, that the person gets to make a decision based on their best abilities of using the steps and the traditions and their knowledge of their group and the needs of their group. They may need to go consult with their group for particular needs with that group. But in general, concept 3 for me was an eye opener, because I thought in the beginning, when I started to do service as a group rep or an area rep, et cetera, was I thought I had to bring everything back to the group, but that's not what it tells us that we need to do. And with regard to the right of decision and the fourth concept, right of participation, again, bringing it back to my personal life, that means that I need to let people make their decisions. That's not necessarily easy for me to do. Particularly if I say to someone within whatever structure I might be in, my employment, my friends, my family, right? I say to them, please go ahead and do whatever you think is right. I need to actually let that happen and
Right.
not sit there and ruminate about what they're going to decide. With the right of participation, I find that a beautiful addition to communication with people. I need to let them participate, even if I don't like what they're saying or don't want to hear it, or don't any of the don't wannas, fill in the blank.
Right.
And especially because I would like to be able to participate. And then there's responsibility there of taking the responsibility of being willing to participate and taking the quote risk, although there really is none, of participating, and having an active voice. And so when I take back to groups, we don't have a rep on our intergroup or on our area or whatever structure you have. It's important that we do, because if not, we don't have a say, and we have a responsibility to have a say.
And it works both ways. We don't have a say, but we also don't have an ear. We're not hearing what's going on, and we're out of the loop. And it depends on, obviously what your sense is of your structure and the importance of AA. But quite frankly, AA has saved my life and gave me a life. So it's really important to me. And I know it's really important to the people around me who want a solution. We have a solution. Yeah, building on what you're saying, and thank you very much for your contribution. I don't know exactly where it is, but there's a clarity in the concepts where it tells you that people need to be clear about what the responsibility is, but they also need to understand it. The description needs to be clear, but the people need to understand it. I mean, that's not subtle. After you understand it, it sounds kind of subtle, but it's not. It's like, if you don't have clarity in the document and in the description, and people don't actually understand it the way it's intended, then you're going to have a lot of misinformation and miscommunication.
And Herb, one of the things that we ran into is sometimes people who, when you have a small fellowship and a relatively new fellowship, then and it doesn't matter, it could be AA meetings, but it could be newer AA meetings in a place that hasn't had AA for a long time. So it could be an older fellowship but newer in that place. So we found that people who were leaving their service positions didn't realize that they needed to train the next people who came in.
Right.
And so then we had new people coming in who didn't know who they were supposed to be in touch with, what exactly they were supposed to be doing. All they had was the written description. And so, kind of, I call it teaching, but I think that's a harsh word, but
no, I
on.
think it's an accurate word. I do training or teaching. Yes, sharing, because you can read something, but it doesn't have the same impact as somebody sharing who understands what the writing is, but has experience with it. That's why this potentially workshop that we're doing can be important when we have people like yourself who have not only read and understood from the illustration, but has had a literal experience, so that you have a feel for what it all means. Yeah. And if we keep, and in the simplest forms, both in the steps and the traditions, and certainly in the concept, if we keep one thing in mind, I think it will keep us, you use the term right-sized, and that is, I just want to help. I just want to help. I don't want to necessarily be right, although of course we do, but I really want to help, and that takes all of the most of the edges off everything we're doing. If we stay in our committee, in our group, in whatever service angle we're at, if we can hold that attitude of being helpful, that'll dissipate the ego that needs to be either right or whatever. Yeah. Thanks so much. Asher, right? Is that how you pronounce it? What country are you in?
In Israel.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for joining us. Wonderful. One of our support people, Nurit, is from Israel. Yeah, wonderful. So we've reviewed, whether you know it or not, the first four, and thank you, Asher, for your contribution. I'm going to pause for just a minute and take it and ask, is there anybody that has any question or comment, experience with, or anything to say or ask with regard to those first four concepts? And this is sort of the protocol going forward, allocating the time, at least that I have. Okay, So let's take a look at the next 4 concepts, and we'll do it kind of like we just did, gently moving from one to the next as I basically turn my pages. I'm using the worksheet that was created with the concepts on it. Concept 5 is about the right of appeal. And then that's where that's now I see in my notes, that's where I got that real sense of the clarity that people be informed and be involved. It struck me because I'm not informed, even though I'm involved with my group. I'm not involved with the service structure of AA generally, and I know now that there's documentation and newsletters that goes out concerning the discussions and the topics of the General Service Conference, which I'm now subscribed to and will be following on an ongoing basis, just to stay informed of the general movement of the topics and the discussion. If anybody has any actual experience with that or comments on how to stay involved and how to stay without too much time, because I don't want to allocate too much time to it, but I do want to, like the news, I watch about 20 or 30 minutes of news. It's all pre-recorded so that I can skip through the things that I'm not that interested in. Anybody have any comments or suggestions in that area or questions about it? I didn't even know that there was this kind of news format, but I did make contact with somebody who's very active in the General Service structure, and they told me about it. I forget the name of it, but if you're interested, you can find that. Or maybe if you know about it, you could bring it to us right now and confirm it. I'm such a novice at getting involved with the service structure that I actually don't know the vocabulary. All right, let's go on to concept 6. It's about having an effective business operation. We've talked a little bit about it already, and that is trusting the leadership. If you and Osher made the comments, if you elect somebody to a position and they start giving you information, trust, I mean, obviously trust, but verify, as the saying goes, so that if you have any doubt, that you do your own research on it. But it's also not a personality contest. Well, at least I hope it's not. Of course, many of the voting systems are, but it's really about competence, about getting somebody in the position who actually has competence, and is interested in what they're doing, not just checking a box and filling a role and having something to do. That's not going to be a very effective method of transmission, as again Osher said, of talking, but also of listening in the flow from the group to the annual General Service Conference.
You're up.
Hey, can I interject?
Please, I'm inviting them. Yes, yes.
I didn't realize, I kind of lost track of what you were saying on concepts 4 and 5. If I could go back to that, would that be okay?
Oh, I'm sure. I'm not sure what we were talking about there,
Well,
but yes.
Well, I didn't follow you quite, and then you went to concept 6. So I wanted to mention that, you know, the right of participation in concept 4, and then concept 5, the right of appeal.
Yeah.
You know, in Al-Anon, there's, you know, we have concepts of service, and we have a service manual and all kinds of stuff. But a number of years ago, a group that I was involved in was delisted from the local directory. And at that time, when I was a member of that group, we did an appeal to World Service. and a bunch of us wrote in and all this stuff and everything. And at the time, it was like it really wasn't. It hadn't really happened where someone had done an appeal like that. I'm sure, it was maybe it had happened, something, whatever, but it wasn't really concise. We had to do a lot of research as a group and looking into how to do things or whatever. And let me put it this way, it was really vague in a lot of ways, and people picked out pieces of literature that, to support their positions and stuff like that. And, the thing is that then fast forward years later, I left that group and I'm on the other side of it, and I was able to see what was going on, and, and I made some personal changes in that group. And now I'm grateful that those meetings were delisted. At the time I was really involved in everything. But, that right of appeal, I think, is so important, that people be able to be heard. And I really feel that Southern California World Service, they went out of their way to make sure that those groups were heard, or that group was heard. It was multiple meetings, but one group. And so, but like I said, it was even Southern California World Service, they had to like set up an actual procedure or whatever to handle it,
Right.
And so we see this stuff in our literature and everything, but then when an actual controversy comes into play, okay, well, what do we do? And then nobody really knows,
Right.
And so that was really, and then who knows, and then since then I heard that I guess World Service has dealt with other similar, maybe not as bad as that, but similar things. And so I don't know. And I think AA has dealt with that kind of stuff with rogue groups and stuff like that. But anyway, I think that right of appeal is so important, and the minority opinion, and yet like I said, I got to experience it from both sides of it. And I'm really grateful that we have the service structure we have, where throughout that, I didn't decide to leave Al-Anon.
Right. Yeah. Then on both sides of that, it shows the love and tolerance code, and also the democracy,
Right.
where everybody is respected, even though the majority feel that the minority is wrong. They will hear it with literally an open mind and open heart, which is, and Paul made the comment, in business you don't necessarily have. We're very invested in our ego in business, whereas although we all have our ego as human beings, in the 12-step structure, we try to think of the unity and the group conscience from a spiritual angle. Yeah.
You've said too, Tanis, whether you're minority, you've even asked people who've abstained what was going on, and hasn't it even changed the group conscience?
Yeah, I think I mentioned that before in one of these workshops, that I had gone to PRASA years ago when I was on the Southern California World Service Board, and one of the workshops that being flown up by Southern California World Service with the board, my name got pulled out of the hat, got to go up to Alaska to PRASA and all that. And the one thing that I can remember from that whole trip, I've gotten to share a number of times over the years, when there's been a group conscience and there's a minority, someone abstains, ask them why. Why are you abstaining? Because that could really flip the vote, and I've seen it happen, So I think that's just a really important principle for unit is the word unanimity. Yeah.
Well, because we want to be informed, and when we truly listen to the reasoning of somebody else, it's information. Now, we don't have to agree with it, but it's incumbent on us to listen to it to see what they're thinking and where they're coming from in terms of a perspective, an attitude, and or a principle that we haven't entertained. I'm very clear in my experience in the steps that I don't know that I don't know, and that continues to baffle me because eventually I begin to know something, and it's kind of like, well, how could I not see that yesterday? Well, that's just what is, of course. Yeah. Thanks, Dennis. Concept 7 is about the charter and bylaws of the service. It sounds very technical, but it's about authority, the legal authority and the traditions. That was the thing that fascinated me there, the two aspects of it. The legal authority, I mean, we have to operate within a society that has laws, of course, for running a business, but then it made the definite distinction of the authority of tradition, that there's nothing in writing about it, but it's the culture of a 12-step program that has its own traditions and culture and protocols, and that needs to be equally as honored in terms of the group conscience. And they added that component in there of the power of purse. So even though they don't have the legal authority in terms of some of the bylaws and etc., because of the traditions and the fingers on the purse, they do have some real authority. Anybody have any comments about concept 7, perhaps even in its practical applications to our personal lives?
Herb, it's O'Share. I
Please.
don't have specifically about concept 7, although I think concept 7 is about reality, right? Each of us is functioning in a country, and we need to follow the laws there. You know, it brings me back to tradition 10. I may have some opinions about those laws, but this is not the place for me to implement those opinions about about the laws.
Right.
I wanted to talk for a moment about concept 5. I'm sorry. Around. I'm sorry, I lost my my place. Yes, concept 5 and the right of appeal. First of all, it helps take, the issue of personal grievances is in there as well, and it helps take personalities out and leave principles in. And sometimes, sometimes even as more than a group in the structure, we can get bogged down by personalities. And this gives us an opportunity to address that and make sure that, we may need to take an inventory of how we're operating. And the right of appeal, together with the right of participation and the I'm blanking on it, the other right, is for me, it all helps with this substantial unanimity, and substantial unanimity for me has become a euphemism for compromise, right? We're trying.
And talk about that a little bit, and we can spend some time on that, because that's a tricky, slippery slope.
So I like to use the example of, what I know this isn't a group that I'm going to talk about as opposed to a larger structure, but let's say the group is trying to decide, whether they want to buy coffee A or coffee B, right? And coffee B is much more expensive than coffee A,
Right.
and so.
No, that's so practical, by the way. That's so practical, and in the bullseye of most of the 12-step groups.
and then, and so maybe on a right of appeal, we will have a proposal of 1 month buying coffee A and 1 month buying coffee B, or buying less of coffee A and some of coffee B, right? In other words, sometimes we can find the simplest type of compromise to be able to bring about substantial unanimity.
Yeah.
And so that's where I find right of appeal is so helpful, because it's not, I don't know if other people have experienced this, but sometimes with the right of appeal, we just hear the same thing over, right? In
Right.
other words, we just had a discussion and the minority view is exactly what they said before. But sometimes it's helpful for even a chairperson to be able to say, well, are there any proposals here that could possibly help us compromise, and use that word because it's much more understood, I think, in regular life than how can we bring about substantial unanimity here,
Right.
which are
Well,
very
because
big words.
well, and it's kind of vague. Substantial unanimity is really vague on purpose, of course. And the word compromise, but it might need a little, for instance, some people would say that compromise is very unhealthy because it's connected to my codependency. Oh yeah, you're right, I'm wrong. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about evaluating and coming to some adjustment where you don't get 100%, but you're personally satisfied with 70%. All right, one of my teachers has said, there's only one reason to do anything. He paused, got my attention. Herb, there's only one reason to do anything. What's that? I didn't know, I'd never heard it before. He said, because you really want to. It was so powerful. Because you really want to. All right, and that's totally relevant to compromise. I really want to have a group that has substantial unanimity. I wouldn't use the word in the discussion probably, but and so I'm okay with not having it 100% my way. I mean, I'm not giving up and resenting. I'm actually going, yeah, that works for me in balance. That's what I mean by compromise. It's a healthy adjustment of my expectations, not because I'm necessarily lowering my standards, but because I'm operating within the principle that I want the group to be successful and I don't want to create factions and or animosity. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's important for us to try here too, come back to what we said about concept one, which is sometimes it's going to be a process for us to work through. And
Yeah.
we're not necessarily going to be able to in one sitting make a decision that's going to work for everyone just because we got a 60% majority. And
Well, yeah, 100%, 100%. That it's a process that needs to be revisited and revisited and revisited and talked about, literally talking it to death. And that's the part that probably I couldn't sustain an interest in a committee with there, because that's just not my personality. But you made a point right at the beginning, and I want to again highlight that because we're very glib with the terms and we're very familiar with the context and etc. But personalities versus principles is a huge principle. Personalities versus principles. The principles will always lead us to the healthy outcome. Personalities will hardly ever lead to a healthy outcome. Whenever I have people come to me and asking for advice, so I have some information and some experience, but I try to help them find out what is the principle in what you're talking about. What is the principle? And my bottom line is always operate on principle, always take the high road, always be generous. I cannot out generous life. I can't out generous life. That's my experience now. I didn't know that because I thought it was a zero-sum game, but it's not. Yeah.
I wanted to touch on concepts 6 and 8. I find them amongst the most difficult concepts to really understand how to implement. And I'd love to hear from other people how they've been able to implement, but the way that I see it is we want to be careful to kind of separate out policy and implementation, particularly when it comes to financial issues. That's how I've understood the concepts, and I find that extremely helpful, particularly in an organization. We recently had in one of the fellowships that I'm a member of, in our intergroup, someone who was going to be at the same time treasurer and co-chair of the intergroup. And this is a worldwide intergroup of because it's a virtual intergroup in one of the fellowships. And you know, I brought up this principle that the way that I understand these concepts, it's not a good idea to have the chairperson also handling the finances of the intergroup. And you know, we're going to come to it in a moment in the later concepts with regard to, in Herb, you've brought it up a couple of times, you know, how do we choose the right person for the job? And sometimes in
Right.
small fellowships or in areas that have smaller groups, there aren't enough people, quote unquote, to go around. And then we'll just take anyone who's willing to do the job. And I think it tells us here to be careful. It tells us here to be mindful that we need to have policy making and implementation. And it's important for us to have as much of a conversation between those two bodies as possible, but we need to have some separation there. And we need to let each do their thing. In other words, there's policy, and sometimes we don't think through all of the implementation when we're thinking through the policy. And so the implementation piece needs to have some delegation to be able to have some responsibility and authority to make some decisions. But then they also need to know where that stops, so that if they need to come back to the policy group and ask some questions, they can come back to the policy making group and say, we're not sure how we're supposed to implement this. I can give an example with that as well. You know, we in one of the fellowships that I serve on in Israel, we have a convention committee, and so you know, and they plan 2 conventions a year. So are they empowered essentially by the national committee to the national committee is essentially our national board, to go ahead and decide who the caterer should be. And so I would say, yes, they're making up a budget. They'll bring the budget to us. You know, we'll approve the budget. And also, if they know that from the beginning we've approved the budget that they have this amount of money, they get to decide how to spend that money. So if they're going to have the more expensive caterer, it might have to come off of, I don't know, the coffee stand or something, you know. And so therein lies the separation for me between the policy and the implementation, essentially.
Yeah, and of course it can get really tangled, and that's where we go right back to what I made comment on earlier, and that is that the principles are clear and understood. And your question is going back to making sure people really understand what the principles are and what the directions are and what the policy is. And the key here is checks and balances, as you're talking about. That's the real key, that one person, it's just human nature. It's inappropriate for them to have too much responsibility and or authority. We absolutely need checks and balances. I think in terms of the step process, the most important component of all of the moving components of recovery is accountability. Because if you have an accountability to somebody who knows what they're doing, you will do all the other moving parts. Accountability, that's that checks and balances. And I wrote down 2 words, clear and understand. Those are very, very different concepts in connection to authority and responsibility, which are 2 different concepts at the same time. Yeah, I'm not sure that helps, but but this is where the personalities and the principles comes in, where you're communicating. I mean, you and I could probably have an hour's worth of conversations about all the words we just used. Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
Um,
I have had to use a dictionary sometimes. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that was, well, thank you for pressing that button. In 1988, I met a man who took me through the steps. I was 4 years sober. He said, get a big book and get a dictionary. No. And I have used a dictionary with everything I do from now on, even though I've got a great education and a great vocabulary. When I look words up that I'm confident I know, I get a lot more information. Yeah. Thank you so much, Osher. Paul and Tennis, please.
Yeah, in answer to Osher's inquiry about someone being treasurer and chairperson, especially with COVID, with everything going on, I was involved, I'm still involved with a meeting where we originally were about 25 to 30 people, and then we ended up going we were on Zoom, then we tried going back to in person, and it ended up being just two of us showing up, sometimes one of them, me, showing up for the in person. And finally we had to make a decision to go in Zoom, and now we've got a nice little group or whatever. But one of the things that that we've done in meetings, and I think we also did this on the service board, it's important when something like that comes up to have a business meeting. And I'm assuming and forgive me, you may have already done that in your group, but a business meeting to discuss it. So that if something like that occurs, the group is aware, like everybody's aware of it. And I think if you discuss it in a business meeting, someone else might be willing to step up and take the commitment or whatever. And I do know on the board I was involved with a number of years, we started having a problem getting people volunteering. And so I know there was some discussion on maybe changing the parameters of who could volunteer, because there was a limitation on, okay, if you've served on this board once already, you can't serve on it again, or you can't be chairperson again, that kind of stuff. Well, after a while, it's like, hey, if you've served on the board for a couple of years, and then you've been gone for a while, but and then there's nobody coming forward,
Right.
Why not allow those people who are really good at service and have service in their heart? Why not allow them?
Well, and they're experienced also.
Right.
But isn't that then the concept, and you might want to comment on it, please, of rotation? The concept of rotation. I took a tour of the General Service Office when I was in New York at some point. My wife and I did that, and they gave us just this gracious tour. It was wonderful. But what I didn't realize is, and I may have heard it, but I didn't realize the implications, that the staff have a 2-year responsibility in their function, and then they're given another function and they have to learn it. And after 2 years, they given another function and they have to learn it. It's kind of like they rotate their responsibilities as staff, paid staff members.
Right. But like when you're in a situation where nobody's volunteering or whatever,
Right,
it's like, okay,
right.
open up
Right.
open it up and allow others to, especially when some of these people are, showing up.
Again, though, isn't it human nature? And we have to be very careful here, because most people are saying, oh yeah, they want to do it, let them do it. They can do it
Right.
for 10 years, who cares?
Yeah.
Balance.
And so you're enabling people who want to own it and become the bureaucrat. And that's what we're trying to avoid here, is creating an authority that is a bureaucracy, that is this subliminal thing that will crush an organization after a while.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But I think from a common sense standpoint, and I don't know practically because I haven't been involved how that works, but if somebody has rotated out and in fact has been gone a year or two or whatever the time frame would be, and can come back and wants to come back, it would seem to me that would be in the spirit of the concepts, that would be a legitimate rotation, coming back with more experience and prior experience.
Or at
Do you have
least
any-
use, yeah, or at least utilize them on a committee or something like
Yeah,
that.
right,
And that's
right.
the thing, is to be open, like, okay, so if you can't get someone to do this, maybe you could get two people to do it part-timers, like, and that's what we've done with some of our commitments, is like we work together, but then you run into problems with whatever people.
With whatever.
Well, we again, we have to be careful of human nature, and it's human nature to have rules and regulations, and then people get rigid about rules and regulations, and that's not the spirit here. The
Yeah.
spirit is a fluid and flexible. How can I help? How can I help? How can I help?
Yes.
And it's not helpful to have rules and regulations and rigidity. Although, again, back to the conversation Osher and I were having about compromise. This is where we need to adjust to reality.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, because in one of my meetings, we're having a hard time getting people to volunteer for certain things. And I've done, like, we're going to be coming up January to turn over commitments. And the our current secretary, she's relatively new, and we encouraged her when she said we're like, oh yeah, take it. But on the other hand, it's like, I have to be careful because I can do all those commitments, but what I try to do is I try to, like, if it's been announced a number of times or whatever, and I wait, and then at a certain point I'll decide, okay, do I want to do this again, or at some point, maybe the group needs to fold at some point. You don't know.
well, and that's a point too. There are seasons and cycles for groups, certainly. And to try to breathe artificial life into a meeting is not helping anybody. Let it die. Yeah.
Right.
And if nobody steps up, let it fold. All right.
Yeah.
If nobody steps up, then you move on. Exactly. Now, I would assume, Tennis, that in your particular fellowship, that could be a real issue, couldn't it? Because you all want to help.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
And that could feed into your potential addiction. So I'm assuming that's where really good, strong sponsorship comes in terms of a sounding board, right? Yeah,
Well, doing
right.
all of it creates resentment.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. it's
And
like,
my
why am I-
sponsor is like, whenever I say no to something, she says, good for you, good for you.
Yeah. Well,
So-
see, and that's where Bill Wilson says there's only two disciplines in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm assuming it applies to any addiction. There's only two disciplines. One's God and one's the addiction.
Yeah.
And the deal breaker from my standpoint is the sounding board of a sponsor or an experienced person to bounce something off somebody that'll be objective and not just co-sign my feelings and co-sign my instincts, but they are really objective and they're willing to hurt my feelings to tell me the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Could I comment?
Please. Oh yeah.
Yeah, this is so great. This is so cool. I love this stuff. But I heard it said that, like, the program's this perfect blend of anarchists and control freaks, right? And this it's to try to reconcile those two
Yeah.
human principles. Don't
Right.
tell me what to do, and this is what you need to do. But
Right.
I love the discussion about compromise. That's such a profound, spiritual thing. I'm
It
not
is.
averse to politics. I heard politics is the art of getting the right things done, right?
Yeah.
And that's what the focus is. And that, as she mentioned, concept 5, that seems to be a big part of that. And going to 7, and you mentioned it, a common business fracture as having responsibility but not the authority, right?
Correct.
And I
Yeah.
love how in 7 they explicitly carve that out. And then
Yes.
the policy versus implementation is, in business too, with that responsibility is, like a roles and responsibility document. What's my job? Do I agree to do it? And then I can be held accountable for it.
Yeah.
And having the right people doing the right things. It's like, you don't want the people cutting the PO to be the same people paying the invoice, right? That's
Right.
like a box thing, I guess, or whatever.
Right.
So
Right.
it's very cool. I look for the relationships and things, how all of these things, connect with each other. So really, really wonderful discussion. I love this stuff.
Well, and it's woven into many of the concepts. I'm looking at concept 10 right now, which is really smack on what you were just talking about, that balance of authority and responsibility. And again, it says defining the authority and responsibility and understanding the authority and responsibility. And that might be murky, as Asher was indicating earlier. And when you have practical experience, that's where the compromise discussion comes in, where people understand we want to help, we want to get something done here. It's not about being right and rigid,
Yes. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for stepping up here. Concept 11, the highest, well, that's one of my favorites, the highest level of competence. That's what we want to fill, and Tennis was making that point. We want somebody who, number one, wants the job, and number two, can do the job. I've seen it happen so many times in meetings where people are literally railroaded because the group just somehow nominated them, and because they thought it was a good idea, and the person actually didn't want the responsibility at all, and they'll take it because of the group pressure. But that's not what we want. We want people who, number one, volunteer really truly because they want to do something, but also that they can do it. Yeah. We talked about the regular rotation because that avoids bureaucracy. My original home group, the secretary was there for 10 years. And I mean, I didn't know any difference until I did. And then there was a movement to honor the traditions of rotation. And now we have an annual rotation of that secretary position, which keeps it fresh. Not that there was anything wrong with it, but it gives lots of people also the opportunity for service. Usher, please.
I am Osher. So I really want to thank everyone for their contributions tonight. I find it to, even though we're talking about worldly practices, if you will, for this to be an amazingly spiritual conversation, right? Because it really is truly trying to practice these principles in all our affairs. It's for me, it's deeper and deeper and deeper as I go through the traditions and then through the concepts. And I love these last 4 concepts. It took me so much effort to try and understand concept 10 with the difference between authority and responsibility. At first I was like, okay, 2 big words. I'm not sure exactly what we're talking about, but sure. And concepts 9 and 11 for me are so connected. If anyone hasn't read Bill's, I think it's paragraph on what is leadership in concept 9, I highly, highly recommend it. It's been extremely helpful to me and to several people that I've passed it on to, on how to be, how to weigh the humanity in being a leader with the necessities, the demands of us, the obligations of being a leader, the spiritual obligations of being a leader. And how do we take criticism? And I can, when we're talking about implementing this in our personal affairs, all of us get criticized all the time. It's just, because we're a member of society and a member of various communities. And how do we, how can we take that criticism and do something with it? And it's been extremely helpful to me to learn to implement what Bill says there. I wanted to talk about in young fellowships or in areas where the fellowship is young, and we don't have people who are sober, clean, abstinent, you know, whatever Al-Anon's decision needs to, definition needs to be for a long time, I sometimes find that we can start to lean toward, well, we'll let the treasurer have 6 months of abstinence or 6 months of sobriety, and I'm going, yeah, no. You know? And so as much as we want to fill that position and we want to rotate, you know, we need to weigh the different, and that's part of the I don't want to say difficulty, because I don't think it's difficult, but it's the challenge of trying to come to substantial unanimity, right? And how can we best serve the fellowship? And Herb, I hope it's okay if I challenge your use of the word help. My former sponsor would say, Al-Anons like to get their help all over people, so I'm going to use the word serve. And
well, that's interesting, because I dropped the word serve or service. No, actually, now I'm hearing it. I'm stopping myself. I'm hearing what you said was serve. You didn't say service. All right. I dropped the word service because it's too sophisticated, it's too vague, and I use the word help. But I like the word serve. I do like it. Thank you for offering it to us, because that's really part of what I consider is concept 12 also, is that servant leadership. And that's the humility of being here, not because I have an ego involved in it, but that I truly want to help in the sense of healthy. And I understand and honor the sensitivity to an Al-Anon or codependent or ACOA type person who has help as the core of their cancer. That's the problem, that they want to help, but it's that unhealthy codependency. So I think that was your sensitivity here, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. You know, I know how to help. You have to listen to me.
Yeah,
I can
right.
solve
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, because
Right?
what I mean by help is control and manipulation. Yeah, so serve is a good word. I'm glad you offered that to us. Yeah, serve is a good word. Yeah.
And then again, if anyone hasn't had the chance yet to read the warranties, they're just amazing. They're just amazing, you know.
Talk a little bit about it, please.
So I'm just putting them up on my screen.
No, it's fine. Great. No, we're having I'm so glad that you're joining us today.
Me too. You know, the first warranty talks about the seat of perilous or wealth or power, and we talked about that before. We need to be mindful that we don't put, you know, all of the power and the wealth together. There needs to be, I wouldn't say necessarily a separation, but it's just, I mean, we've all seen it. If you've been around long enough,
Right.
and if you haven't seen it yet, you haven't been around long enough. Haha, that's a joke. But you know,
Right.
someone who
Well, in
is,
fact, let me just make a comment here. The part of the spirit of it is to avoid wealth. Not just to be careful with wealth. No, to avoid it. Bill uses the term poverty. He says
yes,
St. Francis got it right. It's like, no, we want to practice poverty here. Yeah.
absolutely.
In the spirit of it. Right. Go ahead,
And
please.
so I always take wealth as, you know, for so many of us, even having enough to pay our bills is wealth.
Oh,
And so
well,
we need
that's
to be
true.
careful
Yeah.
with, and even in a personal context, right? You
Yeah.
know, I don't make decisions about big changes in my finances without having a group conscience, you know, talking to people in program that I trust, because,
Right.
and who I trust around wealth and finance, because I've
Right.
seen step 2, I've seen how they are around their wealth and their finances.
Right.
And so, you know, so I was going to say that so many of us, when you're around long enough, have seen, you know, the literature person who doesn't answer calls anymore because they're you know, picking up, and they're no longer, you know, they're incognito, and we can't get the literature because it's at their house. And they also have the till that you know, we were all buying literature and paying for it, you know, and or the treasurer person who's the only person on the bank account for the group or for the intergroup or for the district committee, et cetera, and or national. And so, thank God for understanding in fellowships that it's important to have several people who can have access
Yes.
to everything. And in our day and age, and with digital ability, that's a possibility.
But an
National
easy, a very easy possibility. Yeah.
National Al-Anon Israel is now going through an issue because we can't open a bank account without becoming an official NGO. And becoming an official NGO takes money, and we need to be able to have a place to put the money from the groups that we collect in
Wow.
order to be able to go through the process of becoming an official NGO. So there are a few suggestions on the table of what we could do with it. And one of them is, do we open an account and just, randomly two people's names, two servants' names?
Mm.
And let's see how that goes.
Yeah.
National AA Israel just opened our bank account 2022 after we're close to 45 years of AA in Israel. And the quote unquote secret is that, the money up till then was in a shoebox under somebody's bed for many, many years. And so, it's important to implement these principles the best we can and learn from some of the thank God it's a funny mistake and not a sad mistake that has been made in the past.
Yeah. I don't know enough about the rules in the United States as to that. I don't believe we've had that issue for a long time. Yeah, that's so funny.
But the other warranties are just amazing. If we look at the issue of the, prudent finances, always having an ample reserve, that's where it comes from us. We've all heard it at our meetings, but that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
And, unqualified authority, what does that mean? And in our personal lives, I never want to be in a position of unqualified authority. When I'm sponsoring someone, I don't want to make decisions for them. I can barely make decisions for myself. Why would I want to take over somebody else's life?
Right.
And in my professional work, I have been asked to be legally authorized as the person who makes decisions for one of my clients who I've known for many years. And I'm very uncomfortable with the authority because of the principles of this program. And I'm happy that I'm uncomfortable with that authority because it means that I'll take it seriously and I'll use these principles in order to know how best to serve. And we've talked about the substantial unanimity. I love this. We don't want to be personally punitive or incite to public controversy. In my personal life, that's also how I want to be. I do not want to be punitive. That's not, of course, if I'm working my program, that's not how I'm quote unquote supposed to be. But here's another reminder, and taking a look at what our motives are. And you guys taught me that. I never looked at what my motives were before I came to program, and my sponsor would repeatedly say to me, what's your motive? What's your motive? And, incitement into public controversy. I think I think this warranty takes it a little bit further than Tradition 10. Tradition 10 says, as a fellowship, we don't want to show this. And so here, I think it says to us that the different parts don't want to start any public controversy. And more and more, I, as a human, I may have opinions, but it's okay if I keep them to myself.
Or indicate in all humility, this is my opinion about this, and these are the reasons I have this opinion. What's your opinion about that? And we can have a discussion. And in the final analysis, we can agree to disagree. All right. We're not disagreeable. We just agree to disagree. So that's where it comes back to that word humility, and it comes back to that word that you used, that I just want to serve in the sense of help. Thank you for that. Yeah.
I'll leave with one last thing about the government. I think that's incredibly important. As we do service at higher levels, we get questions like, as Tanis was talking about the example that she gave around, a group being quote unquote thrown out, right? And so we've had that in Jerusalem Intergroup. We had the the intergroup approach a group and say, we understand that Jerusalem Intergroup for AA, that you've been permitting non-alcoholics to share in your meetings, and we're inquiring what's going on, and that led us to write a mission statement for the intergroup to explain what the intergroup's purpose is. Because is the intergroup's purpose to police groups and make sure, quote unquote, that they are following the traditions the way the intergroup understands the traditions to be written? There were inquiries to World Service Office. Is it okay for a group to do this, et cetera, et cetera? And or does intergroup have a totally different mission? And so taking these kinds of things as an opportunity to look at what is our purpose? What are we as a group? What is our place in the structure?
And what was the outcome?
The outcome was that the intergroup controls, at that time, the intergroup was controlling the website that listed all of the meetings. And so the intergroup could say, we're not going to be, we're going to vote on whether or not we're going to continue to list you as a meeting. And we're going to vote on this date. And so if you'd like to come and if you'd like to send your group rep to speak, if anyone else would like to speak. And the group ended up changing its policy because it realized that it in that particular instance, it happened to be the only LGBT AA group in Israel at the time. And open to all, of course, pursuant to tradition 3, but with an LGBT focus. And so it was important that it could stay listed and be able to serve as many people as possible. And if it was a secret group, it would have more trouble having that access. So weighing the different principles.
And the group itself changed so that non-alcoholics were welcome, but they're not able to share. Now, see, there's the compromise we were just talking about. That group compromised what they really wanted to do, but they saw it in the bigger sense of the whole, and they were able to. Well, that's a fabulous example. I'm so glad that you gave us the specifics on that. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Oh, one of in that concept of servant leadership and humility and serve and compromise, the things that came to my mind concerning practical application is, especially maybe it's about men, that might be narrow on my lack of broader experience, but the majority of men that I'm associated with, it's a worm in the wood. They need to be right. And that's their biggest Achilles heel, is to let go of that need to be right. And one of the questions I asked them is, what are you defending? Not that I want them to give me an answer, but I want them to ask the question for this rigid need to be right. What are you defending? There's a worm in the wood there underneath. So I think those are also good approaches, not confrontational in the sense of either competitive and or argumentative, but confrontational in the sense of the individual needs to confront themselves and the possibility that there's ego involved in that need to be right. And why? What are they defending? All right. Wow. All right. So if there's anybody else that has any comments, questions, concerns, inspirations, I'm going to make a couple comments myself about closing out this discussion. I don't see any hands, but I'll call again when I'm finished with these comments. And so one of the images I use for the 12th step is that through the 11th step, we become a lantern, but the purpose is not for us to be a bright light. The purpose is that we light the path for others. My opening comments were all about the message. The whole point of the concepts is the integrity and visibility of the message. You've probably seen this before from me. Who is coming to help them? This is about the message. We are the one they are waiting for. I know from my own personal experience that as a seeker, I was energized. I didn't know that finding was even possible. I was driven, not consciously, but I was driven by something. Once I did the steps, I became a finder, and that was so much more important than seeking. But I saw over my shoulder that I had not been given information, or I was not exposed to information. And that's one of the reasons I do the work that I do, is I suffered for a long time without information about my alcoholism. And then I, in the rooms, suffered for 4 years, not knowing that I was even suffering from lack of information concerning the spiritual awakening for 4 years. Daily meeting, daily conversations with a sponsor. And it wasn't, I don't blame anybody other than the fact as a ferocious seeker, I was not finding because information wasn't being offered. And that's one of the things that these concepts talk about, the integrity of the message, but also the visibility, the effectiveness of the message. We know, and we know that we know, and we can be a lantern on the path, shining light on the path for others. This is what Bill calls our way of living. And I think it was Bob that mentioned comments about head in the clouds and feet on the ground, or Paul, but I believe it's in a vision for you. This is our role. That's that vertical relationship in consciousness, in prayer and meditation, a relationship with power, a relationship with life, a relationship with the God of our not understanding, whatever it means to us. But then that horizontal, walking on earth, maybe as Augustine said, preaching the good news everywhere we are, and if we have to, use words. In other words, be the message by our model of our behavior and our attitude and our contribution. And going back to the word that was used earlier, to serve. That humility of, I want to help, I want to contribute, I want to serve in the healthiest way. This is from the well, there's a phrase coming up that's from the concepts. I see Alcoholics Anonymous, that AA, or any 12-step program, it's about the formation of our attitude, but the translation into action. The man who took me through the steps indicated that willingness without action is fantasy. Willingness to carry the message is wonderful, but without action, it's just fantasy. This is the phrase from the concepts themselves. Freedom under God to grow in God's image and likeness will ever be the quest of Alcoholics Anonymous or any 12-step program. Freedom. That's the key. Freedom from addiction, freedom from unmanageability. Our freedom to serve is truly the freedom by which we have our being. I'm emphasizing that. It's not emphasized in the regular language, but I'm emphasizing it. Our freedom to serve is truly the freedom by which we have our being, the freedom in which we have our being. That servant, that service, that helping, that contributing concept. be the message. Each one of us is invited to have a message and then to be the message. Please join me in this adaptation of the 7-step prayer. Spirit of the universe, I am now willing that you should have all of me, healthy and unhealthy. I ask that the obstacles of my inclinations and behavior be removed from me, so that nothing stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my helpfulness to others. Grant me knowledge and strength, understanding and effectiveness, wisdom and courage, to live in alignment with reality as it truly is.